Some places are simply abandoned, but others are cursed. However, Shadow Creek Camp never forgets those who enter. The whispers of those who vanished here years ago still echo in the wind, and when their faded faces appear on the lake's surface, the night grows darker than ever. And now, as four friends step into the unknown, the camp has already accepted them. Because everyone who enters must pay a price. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to dive deeper into the story. Let's get started. Asterisk. A group of friends decided to visit Shadow Creek Camp, a place that had been closed for years. According to old legends, a group of campers had mysteriously disappeared there, never to be seen again. However, such stories only fueled their thirst for adventure. Upon arriving in town, they stopped by a small grocery store to pick up some supplies. One of the elderly men in the store froze upon hearing the camp's name. His eyes widened in terror, and he whispered in a low voice, "If you go there, you won't come back." But the four young friends laughed off such superstitions. They got into their car and drove toward the campsite. What they didn't know, however, was that this road only led one way. When they arrived at the campground, everything was eerily silent. Not even the birds were chirping, only the howling wind could be heard. They set up their tents and lit a fire. While Mark and Jason went into the forest to collect firewood, they noticed strange symbols carved into the trees. The marks looked ancient, as if etched by a knife, and radiated an unsettling aura. "I think this place belonged to an old native tribe," Jason said, examining the symbols closely. "Don't you think so? An ancient native tribe?" Mark just shrugged. "They're just old markings. I doubt they mean anything." But Olivia and Emily, who had stayed near the campfire, found something even more disturbing. Old, nail-pinned photographs scattered around the campsite. Most of the photos depicted blurry-faced people. However, one of them was different. It showed them. As night fell, they sat around the fire, trying to shake off their unease. But then, from deep within the woods, they heard whispers. At first, the sound was faint. But then, it became clearer and more distinct. "Don't leave us." The voice sent shivers down their spines. Jason suddenly jumped to his feet. "Did you hear that?" No one could answer. Their faces had gone pale with fear. As the night progressed, Olivia retreated to her tent. But in the early hours of the morning, a low, raspy breathing woke her up. Someone, or something, was outside her tent, breathing heavily. Frozen in place, Olivia held her breath, afraid to move. Slowly, she reached for her flashlight. But when she turned it on, a massive handprint appeared on the fabric of her tent, far too large to belong to any human. She screamed. The others woke up and rushed outside. But when they looked around, there was no one there. Only a circle drawn in the dirt, surrounded by strange symbols. But the worst part was in the center of the circle, an old photograph taken from Olivia's backpack. And in that photo, there were no longer four people. Olivia was missing. The next morning, they decided to leave. But when they got into the car, it wouldn't start. Their phones had no signal. Then they realized something terrifying. Mark was gone. But the forest had changed. The old photographs hanging from the trees had been replaced. Now, each of the pictures showed their faces. And at the very bottom, in the most recent photo, Mark stood among the trees. But his face was erased. Screaming, the remaining three ran into the woods, desperately trying to escape. But no matter how far they ran, they kept ending up back in the same place. The curse of the camp would not let them go. Then, Olivia saw something, by the edge of the lake, a blurred reflection. When they reached the water, they saw themselves. But there was one horrifying difference. They had no faces. And then, Jason and Emily opened their eyes and found themselves standing at the camp's entrance. But Olivia was gone. They called her name. They screamed. But Olivia's voice was never heard again. Relieved, they thought they had escaped. But when they reached their car, there was something written on the foggy windshield. "Once you enter, you can never leave." And as they turned around, Mark and Olivia stood by the lake. But they were no longer human. Jason and Emily let out a final scream. And then everything went dark. But did they really escape? No one ever truly leaves this place. The body might make it out, but the soul stays behind. Jason and Emily awakening at the camp's entrance didn't mean they were free, because everything was only just beginning. Had they become the next victims? The camp claims everyone who enters. Perhaps, one day, you'll see their faces in the lake's reflection. Or worse, maybe you'll find their photos hanging from the trees. And if you ever hear whispers in the woods at midnight, don't stop, because this time it could be your turn. For friends, Jason, Emily, Mark, and Olivia decided to go camping for the weekend. After a brief search, they found an old campsite. It hadn't been used for years, but the lake view and the gentle breeze through the trees made it seem like the perfect place. However, before they arrived, they stopped in a nearby town for supplies. When they mentioned the camp's name, an old man's face turned pale. He warned them, "Don't go there. There's something in that camp. Some who went never came back. And those who did were never the same." Of course, the four friends didn't believe in such stories. They thought the old man was just superstitious. But they would soon realize what a terrible mistake they had made. The first signs of darkness. When they arrived at the campsite, everything seemed normal at first. There were old, broken camping chairs scattered around, a worn-down cabin, and a rusted sign at the entrance. Lakeside Campground, opened in 1987. Emily frowned. "It doesn't say when it closed." Jason shrugged. "Does it matter? Just look at this view. It's perfect." They set up their tents by the lake, gathered firewood, and planned to light a campfire before dark. But as Olivia wandered deeper into the camp, she found something unsettling: old photographs nailed to the trees. Dusty, faded photographs. Some showed children, while others depicted campers whose faces had been scratched out. But the most disturbing part was a note scrawled on the back of one photograph in shaky handwriting. "Those who disappear here never return." Olivia read it aloud, and Mark laughed. "Come on, someone probably left that here to make the place seem spooky. Like a campfire ghost story." But Olivia had a bad feeling about this place. The shadow in the forest. As night fell, they sat around the fire, telling stories. Near midnight, Emily got up to use the bathroom and walked into the woods with her flashlight. She was only a few steps in when she suddenly felt like she was being watched. She turned her head and saw a tall, thin shadow standing between the trees. It had no eyes, but its presence was undeniable. Emily froze in terror. For several seconds, the figure didn't move. Then, without a sound, it simply vanished. She ran back to the camp and breathlessly told the others what she had seen. Jason furrowed his brows. "It was probably just your imagination playing tricks on you." But Olivia pulled a photo from her backpack and showed them something terrifying. One of the old photographs clearly showed a tall, shadowy figure standing among the trees, exactly as Emily had described. A heavy silence fell over them. Then, a rustling sound came from the bushes. Mark raised his flashlight, but there was nothing there. Terror in the tent. Despite their unease, they decided to spend the night. They crawled into their tents and tried to sleep. But as the night deepened, things took a turn for the worse. First, there were faint rustling noises, as if someone was moving through the bushes. Then, the rustling turned into the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps circling their tents. Something, or someone, was walking around them. Jason whispered to Mark, "That can't be an animal, right?" Just then, a low, raspy whisper came from outside the tent. "Don't leave." Olivia clutched her throat, struggling to breathe. Emily pulled her blanket tightly around herself, eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, Mark's tent began to shake violently. He screamed and bolted outside. "Something was breathing right outside my tent," he shouted. Panicked, everyone rushed out. The campsite was eerily silent. But near the fire pit, a new photograph had appeared among the stones. When they picked it up, their blood ran cold. The photograph was of them, and in the background stood the same faceless figure from before, trying to escape. Terrified, they sprinted to their car. But when they reached it, they made a horrifying discovery. The car windows were covered with photographs, and in each new photo, their faces were becoming more and more blurred, fading away. Just as they were about to jump into the car, a child's voice echoed from the woods. "Don't leave. Take me with you." Olivia froze. But there was no one there. Jason frantically turned the key in the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. Their phones had no signal. Then, from deep within the forest, the whispers grew louder. "Everyone who comes here, stays here." Emily began to cry. Olivia whispered prayers under her breath. Then they saw it. A little boy in a white dress stood by the lake. But he wasn't human. His face was missing. The last thing they saw was the surface of the lake rippling, and from the water, countless hands began to rise. Then, everything went black. So what happened next? Did the four friends ever escape? Or did the camp claim them too? Was there anyone left to tell their story? As the first chills of winter set in, for friends, Rachel, Sam, Ben, and Lily decided to head to a secluded campsite far from town. This campsite, hidden deep in the woods outside of town, was an abandoned place, forgotten by time. It was called Birwood Camp, but no one remembered that name anymore. There had been an accident years ago, and the camp had been shut down. But for the group of young friends, it was just an old story and an opportunity for adventure. Hell yeah, how exciting can it be to go somewhere no one else has? Sam said enthusiastically. Rachel, though a bit uneasy, found courage in her friend's excitement. "We can spend one night here. And besides, no one's lived here for years, so how bad can it be?" she said, trying to reassure herself. These were the words of people who had no idea they were about to make a huge mistake. When they arrived at the campsite, they noticed something unsettling. The place didn't seem abandoned. It felt as if something, or someone, still owned it. Everywhere they looked, there were remnants of old camp chairs, dried-up fire pits, and partially collapsed wooden structures. But what stood out the most was the sign at the entrance, which had a fresh, cryptic message: "Do not try to leave." What did that mean, and what was it trying to say? What do you think? If you want to know what happens next, be sure to like the video. Lily muttered, "This sign looks old, but it feels kind of new too. Whatever, it's creepy, but still kind of cool." As everyone began setting up their tents, Sam heard a strange hum coming from deep within the forest. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then the sound grew clearer. It wasn't just a hum, it sounded almost human. Sam felt a chill run down his spine but didn't want to worry his friends. Later that night, as they sat around the campfire, Lily noticed something unusual. A light flickering deep in the woods. "You guys see that?" she asked. "Someone's out there." Rachel laughed. "It's probably just an old light. Don't forget, no one's lived here for years." Sam and Ben immediately became alert. Yes, no one lived here, but the light, it felt so natural, as if something was watching them from within the forest. Suddenly, a growl echoed through the trees. A deep, heavy breath sounded from the darkness. Rachel, Sam, and Ben froze in place, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. But the forest was too dense and confusing. There was nothing to find. "Maybe it's just animals," Ben suggested. But the fact that the noise didn't fade only made them more afraid. When they returned to their tents, Lily was more uneasy than ever. Sam and Ben settled into sleep, but Rachel, feeling restless, noticed something odd outside. There, in the darkness, stood a figure, a silhouette. "Who's there?" Rachel called out, her voice trembling. There was no reply, only the darkness. Rachel, shaking, opened the tent flap. There was no one outside, but something was on the ground. A photo. An old photo. Rachel picked it up, her hands trembling as she looked around the dark forest. The photo showed not just the four of them but someone else too, a person with a blurred face. Suddenly, Sam and Ben woke up. "Where did you find this?" they asked. Rachel showed them the photo. "We need to go check the woods." Together, they ventured deeper into the forest. With each step, the trees grew denser and the air heavier. That strange humming noise returned, but this time it was much closer. They exchanged glances. Something wasn't right. They decided to head back, but they couldn't find their way. It all looked the same. They were lost. Then, a scream echoed through the trees. Sam heard a whisper coming from deep within the forest. "You will stay here." A few seconds later, Rachel noticed something. "These photos, each one shows us." In one corner of the photo, there were silhouettes of Sam, Ben, Rachel, and Lily, but around the edges, other silhouettes were starting to appear. And those silhouettes were getting closer to them. Would they ever escape? Leave your answers in the comments. Let's move on to the next story. One morning, a young group of friends, several kilometers away from the town, decided to step into the heart of nature. This group consisted of Emma, Lucas, Nora, and David. They wanted to escape the noise of the town and focus only on each other and nature. After the rain, the air felt fresh and crisp, so it seemed like the perfect time to choose a day for camping. When they arrived at the campsite, everything was still damp. The trees were glistening with raindrops from the night before. This place had not been visited in a long time. Emma checked the map a few times, then said, "This is the right spot. Let's start setting up camp." As the group set up their tents, they noticed the eerie silence around them. From deep within the forest, not even the sounds of birds or other animals could be heard. Only the rustling of the wind filled the air. This strange silence sparked a feeling that something was wrong. Lucas looked around and said, "This place feels a little weird, don't you think? It's like we're the only ones here." David, more relaxed, smiled. "Maybe we're just listening to ourselves too much. After all, solitude in nature is normal." In the afternoon, the friends decided to explore deeper into the forest. As they moved between the trees, they suddenly became aware of something. There was a path, but it seemed unused for years. The bushes, stones, and leaves had overtaken it, yet a discernible trail still remained. "Where do you think this path leads?" Nora asked, quickening her pace. Lucas, a bit apprehensive, said, "I don't know, but it looks a little mysterious." They began to follow the path. As they moved slowly, they soon encountered a stone wall scattered along the way. This wall shouldn't have been there in the middle of nature. The stones were perfectly arranged, but the wall seemed abandoned for years. David noticed something among the stones. "There's a writing," he said, slowly approaching the wall and touching the moss. He tried to read the inscription. "Think again before you turn back," it read. After reading the words, David paused for a few seconds. "This doesn't feel normal, does it?" he said, his face pale. The group, nervously looking at each other, continued to follow the path. However, the path started to narrow, and after a while, there was barely enough space for one person to pass. For a moment, it felt like they were walking into some sort of trap. Eventually, they reached the end of the path and found a large clearing. Before them stood a massive rock formation, with a giant stone door placed on it. The door looked like it had been built thousands of years ago, and the symbols on it were completely foreign. Just in front of the door, an object was buried in the ground. Nora, trembling in fear, said, "What is this?" as she began digging the soil. She uncovered an ancient piece of a statue. At that very moment, a faint voice echoed from deep within the forest. "Follow me." The group immediately panicked and looked around, trying to locate the source of the voice. "It must be the wind," Emma said, though her voice was shaky. Realizing they needed to leave, the group decided to head back. But on their way back, the path seemed to have disappeared. It was as if the trail had erased itself without a trace. Lost in the forest, night fell. The stars shimmered in the sky, but the silence grew even more intense. They were lost, swallowed by the forest. After some time, the group reached the top of a hill. From the summit, they could see the town, but strangely, the lights of the town were not on. Nothing was visible. They only remembered the place deep in the forest, the stone door by the river, and the inscription still lingering in their minds. The next morning, when they returned to the town, no one could understand what they had experienced that night. But something had definitely changed. After a while, another group from the town came to camp there. But they too never returned. And the forest, as it always was, remained silent. When the group returned to town the next morning, they tried to go back to their normal lives, but nothing felt the same. They all lived with a sense of fear and unease that night. David, in particular, couldn't stop thinking about that old stone door and the symbols with the inscription on it. When he woke up, the symbols constantly spun in his head, and he tried to decipher their meaning, but he could never recall what they were. After a while, Emma began to notice David's strange behavior. He was becoming more isolated and withdrawn. He even started having dreams of what he thought he had seen in front of the stone door that night. Emma became worried because what he dreamed of wasn't just scary, it felt like some kind of warning. A week later, the group encountered another strange story in the town. One of the elders mentioned that there had once been a temple deep in the forest, full of mysteries. The temple had been built by an ancient tribe, but no one knew exactly what purpose it had served. According to the legend, before the temple was abandoned, a group of priests had hidden deep in the forest. But after the temple's closure, there was no trace of them. "Did you hear about this?" Jack said one evening while walking down the street. One of the elders said the temple was destroyed, and all the missing people ended up in the depths of the forest. "Why doesn't anyone talk about it?" Nora asked, as a thought crossed her mind. Emma suddenly remembered that night and realized something. "Maybe the stone door in the forest was the entrance to that temple," she said, her eyes widening. "And maybe the inscription was a warning." When David heard Emma's words, the unease inside him grew even more. Remembering that night in the forest, he felt like the things there were calling to him. This thought troubled him even more. The next day, the group decided to return to the forest. They wanted to get there before nightfall and search for more clues. They felt something was wrong, but they couldn't figure out what it was. As they walked deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to swallow them again. But this time, the air was colder, almost as if there were a mystery in the air. The silence felt thicker than ever. With each step, it reminded them of that night. There was a sense of dread in the atmosphere. After a while, the path reappeared. But this time, all previous signs were gone. The path had turned into a strange structure made of old stones and fallen trees. At the end of the path, the group once again found themselves standing before the giant stone door. But this time, there was a difference. The door was slightly ajar. It seemed to be calling them to enter. "We should go in," David said, his voice shaky. "Something feels wrong." "Why did we come this far?" Emma asked, trembling. "Should we really do this?" In the end, they decided to go in. As they passed through the door, they stepped into a tunnel. This tunnel descended downward. The ceiling was covered with old inscriptions, but they were the same as what they had seen before. With every step, the darkness grew deeper, and the stone walls around them became tighter. After a while, they reached the end of the tunnel. At last, they found a room. In the center of the room, on a large stone altar, lay an ancient book. The book was heavy and seemed to have been waiting there for centuries. As each of them moved closer to touch the book, a voice suddenly spoke, "Turn back!" They all jumped back in shock, but they couldn't see the source of the voice, nor did they hear anything else. Suddenly, the pages of the old book began to turn by themselves. The book was writing something, but each letter vanished as it appeared. Each word seemed to reveal a lost past. And the writing ended with these words, "To stop time, everything comes at a cost." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the room, and the group instinctively retreated. The book snapped shut on its own. The stone wall behind them rapidly closed, and the way they had come disappeared. Panicked, the group searched for a way out. But with every attempt, they sank deeper into the tunnel. After a while, they realized this place existed beyond time itself. In the end, none of them returned. When they decided to leave, they felt like they were lost in a forgotten history. No one in the real world would ever understand what they had experienced. And one day, when that book opened again, another group, perhaps one after them, would disappear down the same path.